Welcome to Jurassic Park.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while?
Do you want to know what it is?
There's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Shepherds we shall be, for thee, my Lord, for thee.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
There's a special rug in hell reserved for people who waste good scotch.
He peed on my rug!
He peed on the dude's rug.
Do your worst.
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Welcome to your feature presentation. I am your host, Heath Ball. Today we are talking about movies coming out this weekend, and is Star Wars a Dune ripoff? Let's find out. With me today is Andrew McKay.
Via ChatGPT, stellar greetings to you, Zoglog from the planet Zeta. Peace and harmony to you.
That was a lot. That's a lot.
It was a lot. It really gave us a whole backstory, honestly.
Yeah.
We have a character now. I think you have to be Zoglog.
I'll be Zoglog.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds more like an orc name to me, but...
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Zoglog. Beautiful. Well, yeah, so... This is going to be an interesting one. We've talked a lot about this. Kind of hinted at it before, I guess, that this whole, Dune is very big right now. A lot of people are talking about it. And then a lot of stuff has resurfaced about the author talking about Star Wars. And then we even hinted that, Tolkien had some stuff to talk about. And it's just like, man, this is going to be a fun little episode, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's going to be great.
So let's first talk about movies coming out this weekend. So we have basically just one major release, and it's called Summer Camp. Do you have a little synopsis with us?
Yeah, sure do. So Summer Camp follows Nora, Ginny, and Mary, three childhood best friends who used to spend every summer at the sleepaway camp together. And after years, the opportunity came up for Summer Camp reunion with just them. So presents itself, and they seize that opportunity.
Good for them.
Yeah. Take care of yourself.
It's so funny. A lot of times,
with your friends.
Yeah, it looks amusing. If this is your style, your demographic, it's probably not one of mine. Andrew is a big Kathy Bates fan, though. He
nothing really fires me up like a middle-aged woman comedy. Love those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
Can you, Heath, even name a single Kathy Bates movie? So.
Yes, I can, because that's why we were just talking about this off air, and we had to save it for the pod. Andrew has never seen Misery, and Kathy Bates is in Misery, and it is such a good movie. It's a Stephen King horror movie, and so Kathy Bates right there.
I've never even heard of the book Misery.
Oh,
I assume since it's Stephen King, it's a book. So
yeah, it's a book first and then a movie, and yeah, it's just great. It's wonderful.
Classic Stephen.
Yeah, classic Steve.
Classic Stephen.
Classic Stephen. Well, real fans call him, Stevie Kings, but great. So yeah, but this is one of those movies where, hey, if that sounds fun to you, go see it. I don't care personally. I don't want to be negative, but. I'm going to go watch Misery. I love Kathy Bates, so I'm going to celebrate her this week by rewatching Misery, but I won't be watching Summer Camp. Cool. So we, I'll let you know. No, you got to watch it with me. We're going to.
Oh, okay.
Different cities, same time. Yeah. Let's talk about this. What's just your opening thoughts of, is Star Wars a Dune ripoff?
Yeah, I think that when you asked me this question a couple weeks ago, when we decided to do an episode about this, my answer was yes, an unfortunate yes, because I do love Star Wars and I do love Dune. It was an unfortunate yes because I came to know Star Wars first. And then I felt like I was introduced to Dune as the source material for Star Wars, and nobody told me, so it felt like a dirty secret.
Yeah.
But currently, I don't think that Star Wars is a Dune ripoff.
Wow.
It's
a journey. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of evidence here. We've got some stuff that the author himself has pointed out, but there's a lot to say about this. And I think we'll just talk about a lot of the similarities first, but then kind of our view on that. And as we were going over kind of a list, you even brought up something which about Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
Why don't you say that? I thought that was
That's
interesting.
yeah. I mean, the character of Jabba the Hutt in A New Hope was originally a person. He's a human. So if you've seen any release of Star Wars, I think pre-90s, 1990s is when they changed it. Then Jabba the Hutt, who's like a small character, interacts with Han Solo outside of the Millennium Falcon. And then when I think it was Empire Strikes Back, correct? Jabba the Hutt makes his appearance as giant slug guy.
I think
right?
it's for Jedi. I think
Does it
Jedi's
Return of the
first
Jedi?
time. Yeah.
Okay. So he makes his giant slug guy debut. And that is often like paired with, or like people kind of do that Leonardo DiCaprio like whistle point meme of like, hey, whoa, with the God Emperor, like who becomes a worm in Dune. Spoilers.
Yeah. I know.
Um,
That's another thing
it's
I like. I think I've seen that meme. I don't get the spoiler for like where the book series goes, but it's out there. So spoil for the book series of Dune, but apparently someone becomes a giant worm at some point. So like everyone is like posting that meme, like who knows that answer. And it's just, that cracks me up. And I was like, huh, that's interesting.
Yeah. But it's, I think what really gets people, so it's Paul's son. Now we're deep into spoilers. Who is the God Emperor of Dune, becomes like a hybrid human slug worm. And the release date for that book, so that plot point, came out in 1981. So A New Hope is released in what year? 76?
Sorry, which one? New Hope?
Star Wars A New Hope, 1976.
77.
77. So 1977, Jabba is a human.
Mm-hmm.
1981, the book with Leto II, who is God Emperor of Dune, is released. And in that book, he becomes the slug hybrid person. 1983, Jabba becomes a worm slug character. And he George Lucas retcons like him being a person and changes it. So people see that, and even myself, I see that and I go, ooh, that's weirdly specific. Like, you're telling me that you just happen to have like a drug lord on your desert planet be a giant slug who sits on a throne and speaks a weird language. That's crazy. What do you think about that?
Yeah. And I think as far as I've seen, George Lucas has never said it has anything to do with Dune. And I think that's why there's some contention there too, because if he's like, oh yeah, I love Dune, I definitely used elements in there, that might be, I don't think it would be grounds for a lawsuit. Maybe it would. But at the same time, it is kind of interesting. Like George Lucas doesn't admit to anything like that. And I think that's why it's a little contention. But I mean, man, yeah, we can even go through, I've got a whole list. We're not just going to like go through the list, but some stuff that's like, I mean, desert planet, spice is a big deal. Not really in Star Wars as much, but like spice runs of Kessel. Then Jabba the Hutt, even just like being like a drug lord. It's like a lot of Tatooine stuff. Moisture farmers were first in Dune, Princess Leia, Princess Aaliyah. I mean, there's some stuff that's like, that's very, similar.
And I think it's also worth noting that the back to the spice thing. In my research for this topic, there are a lot of people pointing out that the early scripts for what is now A New Hope were way more Dune-like. That like Han Solo wasn't just a smuggler, he was a spice runner, like specifically. And that resource was on the desert planet Tatooine.
Yeah.
And they also like the moisture farms and Dune, like preserving your moisture constantly.
Sand crawlers.
Yes, say yeah, literally sandcrawlers. There was an interview with Frank Herbert, and the journalist asked him, like, what do you think about this new Star Wars movie? It seems to me like George Lucas is kind of ripping off the thing that you did like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when you wrote Dune. And he was like, movie? What are you talking about? What do you mean? And they're like, oh, so this movie came out. And they got to tell him about it. It took him a long time to see the movie. And when he did, he was so bored. Like, I think he fell asleep, or his wife fell asleep, or something like that.
Yeah.
So he wasn't particularly impressed. And so he didn't like seek out any lawsuit stuff because, number one, he was suing Dave Matthews. I don't know if you knew this.
No.
Did you know this?
No.
Dave Matthews, not like the Dave Matthews Band guy, but Dave Matthews, the artist. They're both musicians, I guess, but he wrote an entire album based off of like Dune, Frank Herbert's work. So he made like a whole musical album thing, and Dune on the cover of it, like named it Dune, all this stuff. So Frank was already in a lawsuit with that musician. So when George came around, and is obviously very inspired by Dune, Frank was like, honestly, I'm not really worried about it because, number one, there were like so many other inspirations. Like George was inspired by Japanese films. There was one in particular I forget the name of. If you remember it, let me know. But like samurai fighting movie, you know.
I mean, like probably Seven Samurai, any of that director's work for sure.
Yeah. So he was influenced by that. He was definitely influenced by novel work like Isaac Asimov with Foundation, Frank Herbert with Dune, but also he pulled some inspiration from, I think it was like Greek mythology or like Greek philosophy for the concept of the Force and the good and evil, because Greek philosophy is very dualistic. There is good, there is bad, and they're always in conflict with each other. And that like is overall the main theme of Star Wars, is that there's light and dark, and those two things don't really mix. So I think by the time Frank got around to like watching Star Wars and kind of learning what it was, he was like not super interested. He could see that he was like a source of inspiration for it, but it didn't seem like he was like upset.
Yeah, and it does seem too that it's things I would argue too, if you're coming at the point that it's a ripoff, that it's not the important things in Star Wars, like the desert, some of the character names, like ideas, like it's not the theme, you know. Yeah, Akira Kurosawa,
yes,
yeah.
Those movies.
Which I find it interesting. George Lucas is such an interesting guy to me because he is happy to say, yep, I took inspirations from old serials and, you know, Kurosawa and like all this stuff, but then he doesn't like to admit modern stuff. And I think it's a lot of his displeasure with current, especially then current Hollywood. I don't think he likes to be associated with that because him and his buddies were definitely kind of like overhauling Hollywood. You know, so I think there's something there where there's some contention where like he doesn't want to be a part of that system, which is interesting because Dune, the original movie, came out in '84, which is post Jedi. So there's an argument too about like it had to be either what worked in Star Wars that we can put in this movie, or how can we make sure we're different from Star Wars now. And I would argue. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, on the topic of those two movies, Herbert had been trying to get Dune to be adapted to film for many years before David Lynch in 1984 release. And I think, this is my opinion, I don't think that Dune would have been adapted in the 80s or 90s if it hadn't been for Star Wars.
Yeah.
So while Star Wars is clearly inspired by Dune, I don't think that the story that it's telling would have been interesting enough. I don't think where sci-fi was in a place where you could adapt something so intense and political as Dune. You need something like Star Wars that's more straightforward.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I can hear the pitch meeting when certain things are happening. Like, I feel like when they were pushing for the Dune movie, it was like, hey, this movie, it's gonna be Star Wars meets A Space Odyssey, because it's the epic. Excuse me, my gosh, it's the epic, but it has that science fiction, that more artsy, I guess I want to say, kind of style.
Yeah,
movie.
really. Almost all of the expressions that we've seen of Dune in film have been like at least a little bit out there, even in Denis Villeneuve's movies. Like there's the face tattoos, there's like they include crazy stuff like drinking worm blood so that you have hallucinations. That's just the nature of the story.
And I mean, I would say too, a character difference that's very huge between Dune and Star Wars is the Han Solo type. You don't have anybody in Dune being like, this is ridiculous,
Yeah.
Ancient religions and hokey weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid. You don't have that guy. You don't have that disbeliever, which I think is I think arguably Han Solo is one of the best movie characters created.
Oh, yeah.
It's like he's definitely one of the coolest. So, yep, now we're just going to talk about Han Solo the rest of the episode.
Welcome to the Han Solo podcast.
Han Solo podcast. You could do a lot worse than making a podcast just for Han Solo.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll extend our platform and just do Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
A 10-year podcast on Harrison Ford.
Yeah, deep dive.
Dive.
So is there anything else that really stands out to you just movie-wise? I'd love to kind of continue our conversation, but just, is there anything that's just like other points that you saw connecting these two?
I think Star Wars, the original trilogy, like I mentioned something like this earlier, how it kind of paved the way for sci-fi in cinema, but now has developed into an absolute monster. I think that comparison is interesting when compared to the books of Dune, because the Dune books, those first 2 or 3, really set the standard for what sci-fi is going to look like in the space of novels, right?
Yeah.
And it's still, I think, the standard. Like when you get into sci-fi, you read Dune, people always tell you about that book almost first. When you start watching movies, especially science fiction movies, people always tell you about Star Wars. But they've both grown into such a huge beast where there are like 15 plus Dune books now. And Frank hasn't authored any since like 86, 80s, like late 80s when he passed. And Star Wars has been so far removed from George Lucas for the last decade that it's like, there's so much content. And I think both franchises are monsters in their own category. They can contain so much stuff that it excites you. Like me, I'll watch anything Star Wars. Don't care if it's bad. If I know it's bad going in, I'm still going to watch it. And there's an equal amount of people who love books that will always read a Dune book, So I think just to recognize, like, Star Wars goes into book categories. Like there are lots of extended universe books that are really good. And Dune is doing really well being adapted to film now. But I think to compare them and to say that Star Wars is a Dune ripoff would be inaccurate because the author didn't really seem bothered, in my opinion, by Star Wars being inspired by Dune. But he was also inspired by other authors, you know? Each creative person stands on the shoulders of the creative people before them. So,
yeah, that's another thing I wanted to bring up here is if you're going to say Star Wars is a Dune ripoff, I think you have to say that Star Wars is a John Carter ripoff.
John Carter.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the John Carter series?
No, wait, is that the movie? They did one movie a long time ago, and it was like Jake Gyllenhaal or something like that.
It's the guy who plays Gambit in Origins. He's famous for other stuff, but that's the only thing I can remember him from. But yeah, so that was a Disney, probably, 10, 15 years ago. There was a movie adapted. But so this book series is, John Carter from Mars is what typically, people call it.
Yes.
The first book is A Princess of Mars. And it's crazy. So I'm just going to read a synopsis because this is like, I didn't know about this show. I'd seen John Carter.
Yeah.
But so I'm just going to read real quick, just kind of like a little synopsis. So it's a science fantasy novel by American writer Edgar Rice Burroughs, the first of his a series. It was serialized in a pulp magazine, All Story magazine, and from February through July of 1912. Okay.
Whoa.
So swordplay, daring feats, the novel is considered an example of 20th century pulp fiction. So it was definitely like almost like a comic book before comic books were a thing, serialized. So you'd get every issue of a magazine and there would be a different story. So, I mean, if you've seen John Carter, the movie, but the same thing with the Princess of Mars, which is the kind of first book. So we're pre 1920, and we're talking swordplay, desert planet, kind of stuff. And you're like, oh, this is kind of connecting too. And I'm not saying, I do think you have to say both, steal from both if you're going to go that way. But I would prefer not to say either is a ripoff. I think they both been inspired by different things. I mean, I think Dune definitely has its hand in Star Wars. And I wish George Lucas was a little bit more open to that and be like, oh yeah, I loved Dune and I took some stuff from it. This is my homage to Dune. Because it's really the only Tatooine stuff that's heavy that, I mean, you get out in the broader galaxy and it's just like, there's a lot that's not Dune. And yeah, even Frank Herbert, like you said, he wasn't really upset. He even said, like, in an interview, there was like, I just wish George Lucas would take me out to lunch or something, like he's not really upset about it, which I think is cool.
Wow. So also, like, if you're going to say Star Wars is a Dune ripoff, I've also heard a lot of comparisons between Harry Potter and Star Wars. And I think it's a similar thing. I don't think that Harry Potter is a Star Wars ripoff with like orphan child lives with his aunt and uncle. Some ancient, like cool wizard guy, not ancient, some cool wizard guy shows up and tells him he has magical powers, takes him on an adventure to learn about it, and he becomes the chosen one. Like you could say that, and we could talk all day about the similarities between Star Wars and Dune or Star Wars and Harry Potter. But ultimately, there are only so many types of stories that are interesting and that people will connect with.
Yeah.
And I think the orphan child that has purpose has been a story we've told for forever. Like even if Harry Potter is a Star Wars ripoff and Star Wars is a Dune ripoff, then those are all ripoffs of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations.
Right.
Like orphan boy is suffering not with his parents, right? Like in an orphanage, and suddenly realizes that like he's super rich and has all this power, and they're just themes of evil and darkness, love, rejection, wealth, poverty, all that kind of stuff. And it's like we're just telling stories, and that's what we do,
Yeah, and it cracks me up because I've heard that joke before. She's like, "Why is everyone in a good story an orphan?" And so I think a lot of what you're touching on too is like just the hero's journey. Like, you know, Joseph Campbell in his book A Hero with a Thousand Faces talks a lot about that too. Just like there seems to be certain rhythms and beats that a lot of these stories go off of. I mean, I would agree. I think Harry Potter and Star Wars have more in common than even like Dune and Star Wars.
Oh, for sure.
Character beats, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff. And I was even thinking too, like, well, is Greta Van Fleet a Led Zeppelin ripoff, you know? And
Yeah.
it's just like, I don't think they would exist without Led Zeppelin. But at the same time, you know, I don't know. You have to, is it taking what was there already, celebrating it and building more, you know, or is it just like a complete, is it a ripoff? And I don't think Star Wars is a ripoff of Doom. I think it's very heavily influenced. And I think that's kind of where you have to go, is just that place of it's a celebration of that. And especially right now, you're so right. There are so different properties.
Yeah.
I enjoy Star Wars. I enjoy Dune, but the tones are so different. You know, the whole idea is so different. And I think the heart of it, we talked about a little off air, and we said save it for the pod.
Yeah.
Is Star Wars at its heart is light versus dark. And I think Dune is a lot more in the gray political, what is right, what's wrong. I think your Game of Thrones is in that area, you know.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, I think that's why we talked about it before, but like Tolkien basically says that he didn't like Dune, and he's like, I don't even want to talk about it. And
Yeah.
it was in like a letter to a fan that he even mentioned that. So it wasn't even like an interview or something like that. But I think that's probably why he didn't.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like the differences between Star Wars and Dune are huge. Like when you consider that Star Wars is heavily influenced by Greek culture, the dualistic good, evil, you either fall into good or you fall into evil. Some characters choose, they go like from bad to evil or from evil to bad. Wait.
Yeah.
Some characters go from good to evil or evil to good.
I got you.
Emperor Palpatine going from bad to evil. So Star Wars is that the dual thing. But
it's almost like you have this duel of the fates, really.
Oh yes.
And you have this whole vision that's across the stars, and then you have at the end of this battle of heroes, you know. And
yeah. And you know what? After the Battle of Heroes, it gets a little rogue in there, a little crazy, but then you have A New Hope.
Oh, truly. And with that New Hope, there is even some trepidation there, because then you have The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah,
you know, and they're
that
coming after
ensues. Thus ensues the Return of the Jedi. Those are the end of the movies. Actually, that's all.
I don't know if you got this. So I was saying song titles, and then you went to movie titles.
What were your song titles? Oh,
you didn't even get it? So
no, I did. I just messed it up because I don't know all the song titles like Heath Fall does.
No, that's fair. That's fair. This is our plug for last week's episode about best movie scores. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, go listen to that one.
Yeah. Good.
So anyway, Dune is way more political, and I think is more of a commentary on religion. Star Wars, aside from Han Solo saying hokey religions and stuff, there's not really any religions other than like practicing the light side, practicing the dark side. But in Dune, the main driving force behind the whole story is you have a Messiah that was a set up, like you have to be the Messiah because we created the infrastructure that needs a Messiah because we need these resources. So we're going to take them from these people. So you have this character who was like born into a system that was set up for him and recognizes that the system he's a part of, the whole empire, will collapse if he doesn't step into being the emperor, right? Because if he tears it all down, then nothing works and the system he's a part of just collapses and then he's worthless, everyone dies, whatever. And so that's where that gray comes in. I think that's what Dune does so well, is like Paul is not the good guy, but he's the main character.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that a protagonist, well, I don't think that the hero could start a jihad and still be the hero.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other subject, right? What makes a hero. And this is definitely one of the most interesting things. And I think what's cool about this is our culture, just in the enjoyment of story, seems to go in waves. I think there was a reason, just movie-wise, there's a reason why we got Lord of the Rings when we did, and there's a reason we got Game of Thrones when we did. And I think even basing on the book-wise, there's it's a similar thing. It's like, oh, we really want some like clean-cut good versus evil. It's like, oh, we really want some more political intrigue, more infighting and structure. And, oh, now we want more, black and white. Now we want more political intrigue. Like, I think it goes in waves. And I think it's funny how even the books originally did that. And then they'll do these remakes where, or book adaptions, where it's the same thing again, So like right now, I think we're in the era of political intrigue. And I could see us having more of a wave. I mean, we just came off of so many Marvel movies, which there are so many. Thanos is bad, Iron Man is good, and those are great too. And I think now we're in Dune Part 2, or even like Furiosa, which is a lot more of these like, is anyone a good person in these?
Civil War would be a good example as well.
Oh, that's a really good point. Even within those movies, of more of what is right, and I think we need both. I think we need both within every movie. I mean, if it's just good versus evil, it just becomes a Rocky movie, which is super good and satisfying.
Which is, that's a great, that's a great word frame, structure for a movie.
The underdog takes on the big bad. But then if it gets out of hand, then we have Dragon Ball Z, and it's just like
don't even get me started.
Bigger bad guys, and it's just like, well, he's bigger than before, and it's like it's the same thing over and over, and I can't get enough of it. So shut up.
So stop talking. Let me watch.
But now my hair is blue.
Okay, so I think I'm going to end with a question. So I think I'm done talking about Star Wars and Dune comparisons.
Yeah.
Unless we want to go for 2 hours. But
I mean, we do, but we also have responsibilities. So
what do you mean? I don't have any responsibilities. Do you have children?
Do you have children? I don't have children.
No.
Not when I'm potting, baby.
No way. So I have a quiz to ask you.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Luke Skywalker, Paul Atreides. What is your guess for kill count? So first up, Luke Skywalker.
Okay.
Estimated kill count.
Okay, so we're talking, I think it's going to have to be, let me mull through this. I think I have my answer, because if we're talking, are we talking directly responsible for the kill or inspiring the kill?
Oh, like if Luke inspires a bunch of people to go fight, he's not responsible for those. But if he pulls the trigger, if he swings a lightsaber.
What if he orders them?
Orders them?
So I'll walk you through my brain.
Okay.
Do you have an answer to this, by the way? Or is this just all? Okay. So because Luke directly killed, some stormtroopers, things like that, some soldiers, shot down fighters, but then he blew up the Death Star, which is a lot of people. He did not blow up the second Death Star, but I mean, that's got to be a lot right there, planet size, people. But then Paul Atreides literally led a jihad of the galaxy, so conquering that. So, I mean, if we're talking direct kills, Luke probably killed more directly with just blowing up the Death Star. But if we're talking about like kills that are because of him or his orders, I'd say Paul Atreides.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So number-wise, Luke Skywalker's estimated direct kill count because of the Death Star is 1.5 million.
Yeah.
So many. Paul Atreides in Dune Messiah, after he's been the emperor for 12 years, his jihad has killed 61 billion people.
A little bit more.
Billion. That's a touch more.
Yeah.
But how many directly? I don't know. He only fought like 10 people in the book.
That's true. Yeah. You got a good point.
But
so our heroes are not our heroes anymore, I guess.
I know. They're all the worst.
Awesome. Well, sweet. That was a fun little topic there. Hope you enjoyed listening to it. So next, what are we talking about next week?
Next week, we have top 10 Steven Spielberg movies.
Yes. Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. It's a director we've talked a lot about, and we want to do some more just like, what's 10 of his best movies? So we're each going to have a list, go over. Listen to last week's episode. That was super fun. That was one of our favorite episodes, just talking about movie scores. And we also have a Spotify playlist that we did based on that episode. And I think we still want to use that Spotify playlist more, like whenever we talk about music or something like that, or especially, in reference to these movies. I think we're just going to start putting some songs up on that playlist.
Oh, yeah.
Fun little, your feature presentation.
Give it a listen.
Playlist. Yeah. Well, sweet. Well, Andrew, take us home.
Hey, thanks for watching, everyone. As always, you can find our full video show on YouTube. You can get our podcast anywhere you get podcasts, everywhere, all at once. We really appreciate you listening. Thanks for joining us. We love talking movies. We love talking sometimes books, sometimes music, if it has to do with movies. So check in every Wednesday. There's an episode for you.
Go see a movie.
And go see a movie.